The spring cleaning bug got me. Hi everyone, it's Hannah Catherine Smith from EADDY'S Craft Room today. Today we are going to be spring cleaning because I just got home from work, really excited to sew with my afternoon, and I am so overwhelmed at my craft room right now, and I feel like I cannot create under these conditions. So I'm gonna do a little bit of research and come up with what makes sense to bust some of these scraps and get some quilts out the door. Okay, this may not look like a lot, but keep in mind I have only been quilting for about 2 years and have made maybe 10 quilts in my entire career as a quilter, so we have to do something with them. So the first thing I did was separate my stash into sizes. I actually took some inspiration from Erica Arndt and how she organizes her scraps. So first I set aside the fat quarters, and my goal here is to go through all of this fabric and cut anything less into a pre-cut size. So a fat 1/8, a 10 by 10 layer cake square, a 5 by 5 inch charm pack square, or a 2.5 inch mini charm pack square. I'm also planning on doing 5-inch strips, as I think that will come in handy, and then 2.5 inch strips or jelly roll strips. The videos that I saw on YouTube of people doing this are deceiving. This is a time-consuming task. I just made a dent in my stash and still have a little bit to go. Now, anything bigger than a fat quarter, I am going to count as quote unquote yardage, and I will probably eventually invest in some boards that I can wrap the fabric around and store in my cabinet later. For now, I focused on the smaller pieces and tried to get the biggest pre-cut I could out of my scraps. Now, one exception I did hold for myself is any fabric designed by Camille Roskelley. I am going to make this Spangled by Kim Deal quilt, and I am exclusively using Camille fabric because those of you who watch me know how much I love her fabric. So I have a little bit of Nantucket Summer, I have Dwell, I have some of her new line Shoreline, I have Sunnyside, and Lighthearted, of course. All of these fabrics are going to be incorporated into this quilt because they make me so happy. So the way I'm organizing these scraps, and was busting my Camille fabric previously, is I am cutting the strips according to the pattern and then just putting them in little plastic baggies that I have labeled with the cut letter, and then also I'm writing with a Sharpie the size of the fabric piece that corresponds with that letter. So this is not going to happen overnight, but I did make a good useful dent in my Camille stash. For the larger pieces of fabric, I took them to my bigger cutting mat, and I am laughing so hard at that piece of string on my shirt that you can see there. How many of you quilters out there walk around with pieces of thread just all over your person at all times? My husband laughs at me because he said between the hair and the thread and the cross-stitching floss, you are just constantly leaving your own trail wherever you go. It's a joke that we have. As for background fabric for this Spangled quilt, I'm also going to be using primarily Camille background fabric, although I may dive into my stash and just use some corresponding Bella solids that I also have. I want to use what I have instead of just waiting on more to come my way. I also am planning on buying a bolt of some of her white on white when her fall line is released, but I hope to have this quilt done before that, so we will see. Now, after going through all of this fabric, I really did make some progress that I was proud of. In fact, I got started on actually piecing some of the components that make up the Spangled blocks, and I'm proud of that. My next quilt I'll be using my scraps to make is going to be a crumb quilt, and I actually got this idea from Just Get It Done Quilts, or Karen, and I am using adding machine paper. I got this off of Amazon, and any scraps that I had that were smaller than that 2.5-inch square or larger than 1 inches, I considered a crumb and set aside from my stash. And so Karen has a whole video on how she does this on her channel, so I want to make sure and give her credit. But I will just show you a little bit of my process as well. She recommends giving yourself at least 1/4 inch on either side of the adding machine paper for your crumbs. So if your fabric does not reach that length, she recommends making a pile of that fabric and just sewing those pieces together in pairs until you reach that length. And the reason for that is it gives you an automatic built-in 1/4-inch seam that you can sew up, because eventually you're going to be sewing these strips together if you choose to make a quilt. So that is what I did. I took my fabric. There is no rhyme or reason to anything that I did here in terms of piecing. It was just truly until I got bored and was done with it, or I wanted a snack or needed a nap or something like that. So that is how I pieced together those crumbs, and then I started adding them to my adding machine paper. I used a 1/4-inch seam as always and just started piecing on either side of a middle grouping of those fabrics. She does that because she wants to limit her time to the ironing board. My ironing station is set up right next to my machine, so I did that because 1, she advised to do it, but 2, so I could also see what pieces I had and what pieces I thought would look better on either side of the middle or next to each other, and that actually is a really great strategy. And it minimizes your time back and forth to your ironing board, whether it is right next to you or whether it is across the room or even in a different room. I will say this process was so much fun, and I think it's definitely expanded my curiosity into the foundation paper piecing world. I do not need to start any more whips right now, but I'm filing that away for later because I definitely think it's something I would enjoy. Using paper was a lot of fun. I liked the stability that it gave my fabric and the accuracy, and I'm excited to work with it again in the future. Another thing I'm excited about with this crumb quilt is I am using all of my fabric crumbs from quilts or projects that I have worked on, and so I think it will be so cool to look back and see all of these pieces of fabrics from memorable projects and to reflect and remember these pieces of my life, essentially, these projects that I poured my heart and soul into. And so I love that about this quilt, even though it's not a type A quilt like I'm usually interested in making. I think it's going to be incredibly special either way. Once I finished piecing my strip together, I took my strip to the cutting board and cut 1/4 inch off the edges of my adding paper. And again, that is for your seam allowance so that you are stitching fabric on fabric. And I am eventually going to make 12 by 12 inch blocks with these. So I'll need several strips to make up that block. And I cut my adding machine paper with that size in mind. And of course, adding my seam allowances to that total size. So this is a 12.5 inch strip. And with that, I have some progress made. My scraps are a little bit more organized and under control. The ones that are being used have a little bit more direction and are actively being incorporated into projects that I'm really excited about. And now I feel like I can better attack my UFOs in my craft room and be a much happier quilter. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.